The blood spread across the kitchen tiles as Eunice Bolts stared in disbelief at her son's face. The gun in Leonard's trembling hands still smoking. Behind him stood Charles, not rushing to save her, but watching with cold calculation. "You told me she was going to take everything from me," Leonard whispered, his voice breaking. As darkness closed in, Eunice realized the betrayal wasn't just from her son's hands, but from the husband who had orchestrated it all. The man who had vowed to love her until death. What drives a person to manipulate their own child into committing the ultimate betrayal? If you haven't joined the Guilty Whispers community yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to become part of our growing family of true crime enthusiasts. Share your location in the comments below. We love seeing how our stories connect people across the world. Upper Arlington, Ohio, with its tree-lined streets and stately homes, was the kind of neighborhood where people moved to escape the troubles of the world, not to create them. For nearly 2 decades, the Bolts family had been fixtures in this affluent Columbus suburb. Their red brick colonial on Coventry Road represented everything the community valued: success, stability, and the appearance of family harmony. Eunice Bolts had arrived in Columbus in the late 1990s with nothing but determination and a real estate license. By 2010, she had transformed herself into one of the top-selling brokers in the competitive Columbus market. Her specialty was luxury properties in Upper Arlington and Grandview Heights, where her warm smile and keen understanding of property values earned her both clients and an impressive income. By 2015, Eunice was consistently earning over $300,000 annually. Her name featured prominently on top realtor lists throughout Central Ohio. Eunice had a gift for connecting with people, recalled Dorothy Preston, a fellow realtor who had worked with Eunice for over a decade. She could walk into a house and immediately see not just its value, but its potential. Clients trusted her because she never oversold or undersold a property. She was honest, and in real estate, that's surprisingly rare. Charles Bolts presented himself as the supportive husband who celebrated his wife's success. A mid-level manager at Fifth Third Bank in downtown Columbus, Charles handled commercial loans and maintained a respectable, if not remarkable, career. To neighbors and friends, he appeared proud of his wife's accomplishments, often boasting about her latest big sale at neighborhood barbecues or community events. "Charles was always talking about Eunice's success," said James Whitaker, a longtime neighbor. "He'd say things like, 'My wife just sold another $1 million property,' or 'Eunice is breaking records again.' I always thought it was sweet how he championed her career." But behind closed doors, a different Charles emerged. As Eunice's star rose in the Columbus real estate market, Charles's resentment grew in equal measure. The disparity in their incomes became a source of constant tension. While Eunice's commission checks grew larger, Charles remained stuck in middle management, passed over for promotions and watching younger colleagues advance beyond him. "I think Charles felt diminished by Eunice's success," explained Thomas Reynolds, a colleague from the bank who occasionally joined the Boltses for dinner. "He never said it outright, but there was this tightness in his voice when he talked about her big sales." In 2012, during a period when their marriage seemed stronger, Eunice had made what would later prove to be a fatal decision. Concerned about providing for her family's future, she took out a substantial life insurance policy worth $650,000, naming Charles as the sole beneficiary. It was a decision made out of love and responsibility, not knowing that years later, it would become the motive for her murder. "Eunice was always the planner in their relationship," said Rebecca Matthews, her financial advisor. "She came to me wanting to ensure Charles would be taken care of if anything happened to her. She was earning significantly more than him at that point, and she worried about how he would maintain their lifestyle without her income." The irony is heartbreaking. As the years passed and their marriage deteriorated, Charles discovered the existence of this policy during a routine review of their financial documents. What Eunice intended as protection became, in Charles's mind, an opportunity. However, his research revealed a critical obstacle: the policy would be voided if the beneficiary was implicated in the policyholder's death. This discovery forced Charles to consider more indirect methods to claim the money he now coveted. Leonard Boltz, their only son, had grown up in the shadow of his mother's success and his father's quiet resentment. A talented musician with dreams of becoming a professional producer, Leonard had struggled to find his place in a family defined by his mother's achievements. By his late 20s, he had established a small recording studio in the basement of his parents' home, where he produced demos for local bands and worked on his own music. Leonard had real talent, said Matthew Jenkins, a local musician who had recorded with him. His beats were solid, his production clean. But he lacked confidence. He was always second-guessing himself, especially after getting feedback from his father. Leonard's relationship with his parents was complicated. While he admired his mother's drive and success, he found her expectations overwhelming. With Charles, the relationship was more nuanced. Charles positioned himself as the more understanding parent, the one who got Leonard's artistic ambitions in ways Eunice supposedly couldn't. In reality, Charles was laying groundwork, establishing himself as Leonard's ally for his own purposes. A pattern had emerged in Leonard's life. When faced with rejection or stress, he turned to alcohol. What began as social drinking in college evolved into a concerning dependency that worsened whenever his music career faced setbacks. This vulnerability would later become a key factor in Charles's manipulation. Leonard would be fine for months, totally focused on his music, explained Jordan Price, a childhood friend. Then he'd get a rejection from a label or lose a potential client, and he'd disappear into a bottle for weeks. When he emerged, he'd be full of resolve again, but the cycle kept repeating. Despite his struggles, Leonard's life took a positive turn when he met Wendy Davis at a local music venue in 2019. Wendy, a bartender with aspirations of opening her own restaurant, seemed to provide the stability and support Leonard needed. They moved into a small apartment together, and for a time, Leonard's drinking decreased as he focused on building a future with Wendy. What neither Leonard nor Eunice realized was that Wendy brought her own financial pressures to the relationship. Burdened with student loans and credit card debt, Wendy saw in Leonard not just a partner, but potentially a path to financial security through his family connections. Wendy was always asking about Leonard's parents, recalled Sophia Phillips, a coworker from the bar. She was particularly interested in his mother's real estate business. At the time, I thought she was just trying to understand his family better, but looking back, there was something calculating about her questions. As Leonard and Wendy's relationship progressed, the financial dynamics within the Boltz family continued to deteriorate. Charles, unbeknownst to Eunice, had developed a gambling problem that led to substantial debts. What began as occasional trips to the Scioto Downs casino evolved into high-stakes poker games and sports betting that left him owing nearly $100,000 to increasingly impatient creditors. To cover these debts without alerting Eunice, Charles had taken out several personal loans, using falsified financial documents. The pressure was mounting, and Charles knew it was only a matter of time before his financial house of cards collapsed. Eunice, savvy with money in her professional life, applied the same principles at home. She managed the family finances, reviewing their joint accounts regularly and requiring Charles to explain unusual expenses. This financial oversight, while prudent, further fueled Charles's resentment and desperation. Eunice would question every unusual charge, said Helen Boltz, Charles's sister. Charles complained to me that he felt like a child having to ask for an allowance. He'd say things like, "I'm a grown man being treated like a teenager with his first credit card." I told him they should go to counseling, but he just laughed it off. To the outside world, the Boltzes remained pillars of the Upper Arlington community. They hosted summer barbecues, attended charity galas, and maintained the facade of a successful, happy family. But behind the pristine facade of their colonial home, resentment, financial stress, and manipulation were creating a toxic environment that would ultimately turn deadly. In the spring of 2021, Leonard invited his parents to meet Wendy properly at a dinner he organized at the Guild House, an upscale restaurant in the Short North Arts District. It was during this evening that Charles first recognized a potential ally in his emerging plan. He noticed how Wendy's eyes lingered on Eunice's designer watch, how she asked pointed questions about the real estate market and commission structures. Charles saw in Wendy the same hunger for financial security that drove his own desperate schemes. After dinner, while Eunice and Leonard discussed his latest music project, Charles managed a brief private conversation with Wendy. "You deserve nice things too," he told her, gesturing subtly toward Eunice's Cartier bracelet. "This family has plenty to go around, if you know how to become part of it." The comment was vague enough to seem innocent but specific enough to plant a seed. Over the following weeks, Charles manufactured reasons to see Wendy alone. He would offer to pick up Leonard's forgotten items from their apartment or suggest meeting for coffee to plan a surprise for Leonard's upcoming birthday. During these encounters, he subtly highlighted the financial disparity in his marriage, portraying himself as controlled and diminished by Eunice's success. Wendy, recognizing in Charles a desperation that mirrored her own financial anxiety, eventually initiated a deeper connection. Their first kiss happened in the parking lot of Easton Town Center, where they had met under the pretense of choosing a gift for Leonard. This kiss evolved into a full-blown affair conducted in hotel rooms and during carefully orchestrated absences of Leonard. "I started noticing Wendy getting texts that made her smile in a way she never did with Leonard," said Sophia Phillips. "When I asked who they were from, she'd just say work or change the subject. She also suddenly had new clothes and a pair of expensive sunglasses she claimed were knockoffs. I had my suspicions, but I never imagined the truth." 6 weeks into their affair, Charles showed Wendy bank statements and the life insurance policy during a rendezvous at a hotel near the airport. He explained how the $650,000 payout could solve both their problems, his debts would be cleared, and they could start a new life together away from Columbus. The only obstacle was finding a way to eliminate Eunice without implicating himself. "We both deserve a fresh start," he told her, stroking her hair as they lay in the hotel bed. "Imagine never worrying about money again. Imagine being able to open that restaurant you talk about." Charles had already begun researching the exclusions on Eunice's life insurance policy. He learned that suicide would void the policy, but homicide would not, as long as the beneficiary was not involved in the crime. This critical detail shaped his evolving plan. He needed someone else to kill Eunice, someone who could not be traced back to him as a co-conspirator. His son Leonard, vulnerable and easily manipulated, became the unwitting solution to Charles's problem. Charles's manipulation of Leonard was subtle and methodical. He began by reinforcing Leonard's dependence on him, positioning himself as the only person who truly understood Leonard's artistic ambitions. At the same time, he planted seeds of doubt about Eunice's support. "Your mother was asking me about when you're going to get a real job again," Charles would mention casually, though Eunice had said no such thing. "I defended you, of course. I told her your music is your career, but you know how she is. Always worried about appearances." These fabricated conversations gradually created distance between Leonard and his mother. Charles also made a point of being visibly supportive when Leonard was drinking, unlike Eunice who expressed concern about his alcohol consumption. Charles would bring beer when visiting Leonard's studio, ensuring alcohol was always associated with their bonding time. "I noticed Leonard started talking differently about his mom," said Jordan Price. For years, he'd been proud of her success, even if he felt pressured by it. But suddenly he was making comments about how she looked down on his music, how she didn't think he was good enough. It was a noticeable change. Leonard's music career, which had shown promise with local recognition, faced a devastating setback in early summer when a recording contract he had been counting on fell through. The small Columbus-based label cited financial difficulties, but the rejection sent Leonard into a tailspin of drinking and self-doubt. As Leonard struggled with this professional disappointment, Wendy became increasingly distant, often claiming to work extra shifts at the bar while actually meeting Charles. Her decreased interest further damaged Leonard's already fragile self-esteem, making him even more susceptible to his father's manipulation. During this vulnerable period, Charles began dropping hints about the life insurance money that could fund Leonard's music career. "If only you had proper capital," Charles would say while listening to Leonard's latest tracks. "With the right investment, you could build a real studio, not just this basement setup." To accelerate his plan, Charles created fabricated emails that appeared to be from Eunice to her real estate partner, discussing plans to sell the family home, including the basement where Leonard had built his studio. He accidentally left these fake emails open on his laptop where Leonard would see them. "Dad, is Mom really planning to sell the house?" Leonard asked when he discovered the emails. Charles feigned surprise, then resignation. "I wasn't supposed to tell you yet. She thinks it's time for us to downsize. I fought for your studio, son, but you know your mother when she's made up her mind about money." Throughout this period, Eunice noticed tensions in the family but misattributed them to normal stresses: Leonard's career disappointments, Charles's work pressures, and the general strain of family dynamics. She attempted to bridge the growing distance by planning family dinners and showing interest in Leonard's music, unaware that every gesture was being reinterpreted and poisoned by Charles's narrative. At a Memorial Day family gathering, Eunice's sister Rhoda observed unusual dynamics that troubled her. While everyone else was engaged in conversation on the patio, she noticed Charles and Wendy in an intense discussion by the kitchen island, standing closer than in-laws typically would. When Leonard approached, they abruptly separated, with Wendy suddenly becoming overly affectionate toward Leonard. Something felt off, Rhoda would later tell investigators. The way Charles looked at Wendy wasn't appropriate, and Wendy seemed to be performing when Leonard was around. "I mentioned it to Eunice, but she dismissed it. She said I was imagining things, that Charles was just being welcoming to Leonard's girlfriend." As summer progressed, Leonard's financial situation worsened. The loss of the recording contract meant he needed to find other income sources to maintain his studio equipment. Desperate to finish a demo he believed could attract a larger label, he took out high-interest loans that quickly became unmanageable. Charles seized on this financial stress, suggesting to Leonard that Eunice didn't believe in his talents enough to help him financially. "She told me investing in your music would be throwing good money after bad," Charles lied during one of their drinking sessions. "I disagreed, of course. I believe in you, son. I always have." By August, Charles and Wendy had developed a specific plan: Leonard would be manipulated into killing Eunice during an emotional confrontation. Charles would ensure he appeared innocent, and Wendy would provide him with an alibi. Charles promised Wendy that once he received the insurance money, they would split it, allowing her to clear her debts and open the restaurant she dreamed of. They established a code in their text messages, referring to their murder plot as retirement plans and future investments. They were careful never to explicitly mention murder or Eunice, instead using phrases like, "when our situation changes," and "after the transition period." "I can't wait for our new beginning," Wendy texted Charles in late August. "Once the transition happens, everything will fall into place." "Patience," Charles replied. "The best investments take time to mature. But I promise, our retirement will be worth the wait." The final phase of their plan was set in motion when Leonard received devastating news: the demo he had invested everything in was rejected by every label he had submitted it to. One producer had been particularly cruel, suggesting Leonard should find another line of work. This rejection, coming after months of financial strain and emotional manipulation, pushed Leonard to his breaking point. Charles, seeing his opportunity, invited Leonard over to the house, suggesting they have a few drinks and talk through his options. He made sure Wendy knew to be present but hidden in the guest bedroom, with instructions to leave through the back door during the inevitable confrontation. "Tonight might be the night our investment matures," he texted her that morning. "Be ready to move quickly when the market shifts." "I'm prepared," she responded. "Just give the signal." Throughout the day, Charles continued reinforcing Leonard's sense of betrayal, reminding him of the fabricated plans to sell the house and Eunice's supposed lack of faith in his talent. He strategically supplied Leonard with alcohol, ensuring his emotional state became increasingly volatile. When Eunice arrived home from showing properties that evening, she found Leonard intoxicated in the kitchen, Charles hovering nearby with an expression of manufactured concern. "Leonard, what are you doing here?" Eunice asked, setting down her briefcase. "I thought you were working on new material this week." "What's the point?" Leonard slurred. "No one wants my music. No one believes in me. And now you're taking away my studio too." Eunice looked confused. "What are you talking about? What studio?" "Don't pretend you don't know," Leonard shouted, his voice rising with alcohol-fueled emotion. "Dad told me about your plans to sell the house. My studio, Mom. The one thing I've built that means anything." Eunice turned to Charles, bewilderment clear on her face. "Charles, what is he talking about? We never discussed selling the house." Charles maintained his performance, shaking his head sadly. "Eunice, don't make this harder." Leonard found the emails. "He knows about the realtor's assessment." As Eunice began to protest, Charles subtly redirected the conversation. "I think I heard something outside. Probably just raccoons in the trash again." He moved toward the drawer where he had earlier planted his handgun, ostensibly to check the noise, but purposely drawing Leonard's attention to the weapon. The argument between Eunice and Leonard escalated, with Leonard becoming increasingly agitated and Eunice growing more confused by accusations based on conversations that had never happened. "You've never believed in me," Leonard shouted. "Dad's the only one who ever supported my music." "That's not true," Eunice insisted, reaching for her phone. "Leonard, you're not thinking clearly. Let me call Rhoda to come get you. You can sleep it off at her place." As Eunice turned away to make the call, Charles seized the moment, whispering to Leonard, "It's now or never. She's going to destroy everything you've worked for." In that moment of alcohol-induced panic and after months of psychological manipulation, Leonard grabbed the gun from the drawer. Eunice turned back, phone in hand, to find her son pointing the weapon at her. Behind him stood Charles, his expression shifting from fake concern to cold satisfaction. In that final moment, as she looked into her husband's eyes, Eunice understood the betrayal unfolding before her. The realization dawned in her eyes just as Leonard, trembling and confused, pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the kitchen. Eunice collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across the pristine tiles she had selected during their last kitchen renovation. Leonard stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, horror replacing anger on his face as the reality of what he'd done began to penetrate his alcohol-fogged mind. "You told me she was going to take everything from me," he whispered, his voice breaking. Charles moved quickly, taking control of the situation. "Give me the gun, son," he said calmly, taking the weapon and placing it on the counter. "We need to call 911. Remember, she was threatening you. You were defending yourself." As Charles dialed emergency services, performing the role of a distraught husband discovering a tragedy, Wendy slipped out the back door as planned, unnoticed in the chaos of the moment. Charles's voice broke convincingly as he reported that his son had shot his wife during an argument, that he had just arrived home to find the situation already escalating. 30 minutes later, after police had arrived and Leonard had been taken into custody, Wendy returned through the front door, playing the part of the concerned girlfriend rushing to the scene after receiving frantic calls from Charles about the tragedy. "I was at work," she told officers, providing the alibi she and Charles had rehearsed. "Charles called me hysterical, saying something terrible had happened. I came as soon as I could." The initial investigation focused entirely on Leonard. The physical evidence was straightforward: his fingerprints on the gun, gunshot residue on his hands, and his highly intoxicated state made him appear clearly culpable. Charles was treated as a grieving husband who had lost his wife to his son's uncontrollable rage. The community of Upper Arlington reacted with shock and disbelief as news of Eunice Boltz's murder spread. Neighbors gathered for candlelight vigils, real estate colleagues created a memorial outside her office, and local news covered the tragic story of a successful businesswoman killed by her troubled son. "It's beyond comprehension," Dorothy Preston told reporters, tears streaming down her face. Eunice was the most generous, loving person. For her life to end this way, at the hands of her own son, it's unimaginable. 1 week after the murder, Eunice's funeral at Upper Arlington Lutheran Church drew hundreds of mourners. Charles played his role flawlessly, appearing devastated yet dignified, accepting condolences with tearful gratitude. Rhoda supported him through the service, her own grief genuine but increasingly tempered by growing suspicion. The day after the funeral, Charles contacted Eunice's insurance company to begin the claims process for the $650,000 life insurance policy. His haste, which he attributed to needing funds for legal expenses related to Leonard's defense, struck the insurance adjuster as unusual but not unprecedented given the circumstances. 2 weeks after the murder, as the initial shock began to fade, Rhoda found herself troubled by inconsistencies in Charles's behavior and statements. During a visit to help sort through Eunice's belongings, she noticed Charles already packing away family photos and Eunice's personal items with an efficiency that seemed at odds with his supposed grief. "You seem to be moving on rather quickly," she observed, watching him methodically empty Eunice's closet. "The house feels haunted with her things everywhere," Charles explained, not meeting Rhoda's eyes. "I need to move forward for my own sanity." What struck Rhoda as particularly suspicious was Charles's lack of interest in understanding why Leonard had killed Eunice. Most parents would be devastated not only by losing a spouse but by having their child become a murderer. Charles, however, seemed to accept Leonard's action without question or apparent distress. Acting on her growing concerns, Rhoda began her own informal investigation. She spoke with neighbors, asking if they had noticed anything unusual in the days leading up to Eunice's death. One neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, mentioned seeing Wendy's car parked a block away on the afternoon of the murder, hours before the 911 call. "I remember because it has that distinctive bumper sticker for that vegetarian restaurant," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "I thought it was odd she parked so far from the house. Usually, visitors use the driveway." 3 weeks after the murder, Rhoda discovered the most damning evidence. Another neighbor, Peter Kagawa, had installed a security system after a series of car break-ins on the street. His cameras, which captured a partial view of the Boltz home, showed Wendy arriving at 3:45 p.m. on the day of the murder. More than 2 hours before the 911 call and completely contradicting her statement that she had arrived only after being called by Charles. Rhoda immediately brought this evidence to Detective James Brandon, the lead investigator on the case. Initially skeptical, Brandon agreed to review the footage. This new evidence forced the police to widen their investigation beyond Leonard. "We're now looking at the possibility of a conspiracy," Detective Brandon told his team during a case review. "The timeline Ms. Davis gave us doesn't match the video evidence. We need to look deeper into her relationship with Charles Boltz." 1 month after the murder, investigators obtained warrants for Charles and Wendy's phone records. What they discovered was a pattern of communication that belied their claims of a casual acquaintance. Hundreds of text messages had been exchanged in the months leading up to Eunice's death, with frequency increasing dramatically in the weeks before the murder. Digital forensics experts recovered deleted messages where Charles had coached Wendy on what to tell police. "Remember, you were at work. You only came after I called you about the accident. Keep it simple. Don't elaborate unless asked directly." Another recovered message from Charles to Wendy, sent the morning of the murder, read, "Tonight everything changes. By this time tomorrow, our problems will be behind us. Just follow the plan." As investigators dug deeper, they discovered more physical evidence contradicting Charles's version of events. Gunshot residue analysis revealed particles on Charles's clothing consistent with him standing much closer to Eunice when the gun was fired than he had claimed in his statement. The GSR pattern suggests Mr. Bolts was within 3 feet of the victim when the weapon was discharged, the forensic analyst reported. This contradicts his statement that he entered the room after hearing the gunshot from another part of the house. 1 month and 2 weeks after the murder, detectives approached Leonard in custody with their findings. Now sober and grappling with the horror of what he had done, Leonard began to see his father's manipulation for what it was. "He set me up," Leonard said quietly, as the realization dawned. "All those things he told me about Mom wanting to sell the house, about her not believing in me. Was any of it true?" 2 months after Eunice's death, Leonard agreed to testify against his father and Wendy in exchange for reduced charges of second-degree manslaughter instead of first-degree murder. His testimony would prove crucial in unraveling the full conspiracy. Meanwhile, the insurance company had frozen Charles's claim pending the expanded police investigation. Financial forensics revealed Charles had researched how to transfer large sums to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, establishing a clear financial motive for wanting Eunice dead. The trial of Charles Bolts and Wendy Davis began 6 months after Eunice's murder, drawing national media attention. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of greed, manipulation, and betrayal, with Charles as the mastermind who used both his son and his son's girlfriend as pawns in his scheme to collect life insurance money and escape his gambling debts. Leonard's testimony provided the emotional centerpiece of the trial. Sober and clear-eyed, he recounted months of subtle manipulation by his father, the fabricated emails about selling the house, and the constant reinforcement that Eunice didn't believe in his talents. He would tell me things like, "Your mother thinks your music is just a hobby," or, "She told me you'll never make it in the industry," Leonard testified, his voice hollow with grief and regret. "When I was at my lowest after the label rejected my demo, he was there with alcohol and more stories about how Mom was against me. I was drunk and desperate, and I believed him." When asked about the moments leading up to the shooting, Leonard broke down. "I remember Mom turning to call Aunt Rhoda, and Dad whispering to me that it was, now or never. He said she was going to destroy everything I'd worked for. In that moment, I just snapped. I'll never forgive myself." The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts for both Charles and Wendy on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Charles received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Wendy, considered somewhat less culpable but still an active participant in the conspiracy, received a sentence of 25 years to life. Leonard was sentenced to 15 years for manslaughter, with the possibility of parole after 8 years, the judge acknowledging the extraordinary manipulation he had experienced while still holding him accountable for his actions. The life insurance company formally denied Charles's claim due to his involvement in Eunice's death. Instead, the court directed that the policy proceeds be placed in a victims' compensation fund. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Rhoda Winters took over management of her sister's real estate business, maintaining Eunice's legacy of integrity and client service. She also established a trust fund for Leonard that would be available upon his release, believing that despite his terrible actions, he was also a victim of Charles's manipulation. Eunice would want him to have a chance at redemption, Rhoda explained to close friends. She loved Leonard, even when he struggled. She would want him to have the opportunity to rebuild his life when he's paid his debt to society. The Bolts case became a sobering reminder to the Upper Arlington community that even seemingly perfect families can harbor deadly secrets. Beneath the veneer of success and respectability, Charles's resentment, greed, and manipulation had destroyed not just his wife's life, but his son's future as well. Leonard's journey in prison began with intensive therapy to address both his alcohol dependency and the trauma of recognizing how thoroughly his father had manipulated him. He eventually began working with the prison's music program, finding some small measure of purpose in teaching other inmates to express themselves through music. The community established a memorial fund in Eunice's name dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence, recognizing that financial control and psychological manipulation are often precursors to more violent forms of abuse. The true tragedy of Eunice Boltz's murder lies not just in the loss of a vibrant, successful woman, but in the revelation that the greatest danger came from those she trusted most. Her death serves as a stark reminder to look beyond appearances and recognize the warning signs of psychological manipulation and control before they escalate to violence. The whispers of resentment, if recognized early, might have prevented a family's destruction. Instead, they became the guilty whispers that would haunt 3 lives forever: Eunice, murdered by her own son; Leonard, manipulated into becoming a killer; and Charles, whose greed and resentment transformed him from husband and father into the architect of unimaginable tragedy. The truth behind closed doors can only come to light when we have the courage to share it. If this story moved you, help others discover it by sharing this video. Leave a like so others can see this story and gain awareness. And don't forget to subscribe to Guilty Whispers. Together, we can ensure that stories like Eunice's are never forgotten and that justice finds its voice.